Hey everybody, this is Angel. You're watching ASMR Angel Reads. Before we get started today, I just want to ask if you could like and subscribe and share. It all helps me out. Um, I'm not looking to make money off of this gig. I just do it for fun. But I'd like more than 3 subscribers. um... And oh, if you're interested, I have another channel. It's called Angels, Orchids, and More. If I can figure out how to put a link in the description, I'll do that. But it's basically a hobby channel. But since orchids are my main hobby, it's mostly orchid videos. I did do a couple of shorts last week showing my flower spikes. I have 3 orchids in flower spike right now. So they should be blooming by Christmas or my birthday in January. I'm very excited and I can't wait. Anyway, we're continuing with Daggerspell. We are on chapter 6. Chapter 6 is this long, which is about half as much, maybe a third as much as chapter 5 was. But it's going to be in 5 or 6 parts, not sections, just parts. One section with 5 or 6 parts. I need my glasses. And I should turn my lamp on. Oh, there, now you can see me. Okay, chapter 6 starts with Elded in 1062. Can a blacksmith affix a shoe without nails? Can a tailor make a shirt without thread? In just this way, honor holds the kingdom together by making a man obey those above him and treat those below him generously. Without honor, the kingdom would crumble until none obeyed even the king himself, and none gave a starving child even a scrap of bread. Every noble-born man, therefore, should honor his overlord in all respects, scrupulously observing every law and pomp of his court. And so Jill slain Corbin, Lovian said. By the goddess herself, I never would have thought it. Oh, I had faith in her, Nevin said. She has resources, you might call them, beyond what even she knows herself. That is a most cryptic remark. It will have to stay that way. My apologies. Lovian smiled at him in fond exasperation. They were sitting in the little garden behind the joined rocks of Dungorberin, where the last red roses drooped against the gray stone. Will your friend from the west be coming here? Lovian asked. He won't. I'd hope he would, just in case Rice wanted to hear that Laudelane was murdered, but both he and the West folk with him are eager to get back to their people. They're a strange lot, the West folk. It's odd so many people abhor them, but I've always found them congenial. Not enough to ride off with them, but congenial. Although she spoke casually, Nevin felt an odd doubt nag at his mind. Lova, can I ask you somewhat that might be hideously insulting? You may, but I might not answer. Fair enough. Was Tinger truly Rodri's father? Lovian tilted her head to one side and considered him with mischief in her eyes. In spite of her gray hair and the marks of age on her face, he could clearly see how beautiful she must have been 20 years ago. He wasn't at that. Not even Medelia and Danyan know, but he wasn't. Your secret will be safe with me, I assure you. Here, where did you meet a man of the West folk? My, you do have sharp eyes, my friend. It was right here in Dungorberin when my brother was Tyran. Lovian looked away, her smile fading into bitterness. It was the summer that Tinger made Lyned his mistress. I was still young then, and I didn't understand things the way I do now. Just thinking that the dawn time he would have had a whole stable full of concubines, very cold comfort indeed. So I rode off in a huff and came to visit Guaric. I remember sitting in this very garden and weeping for my hurt pride. Then, as they do every now and then, some West folks rode in to pay Tieran a tribute of horses, and with them was a bard who was the most beautiful man I've ever seen, for all his peculiar eyes. She paused at the smile returning. I wanted some of what my own back, and I took it. I wanted somewhat of my own back, and I took it. Do you despise me? Not in the least, and you don't sound like a woman who feels herself shamed. Well, if anything, I still feel rather smug. Lovian tossed her head like a young lass. And somehow my bard made me realize that it wasn't Tinger I loved, but the power of being his wife. We had some lovely weeks together. When I went home, I made sure that the little Linen knew who ruled in Aberwin's court, but I'll admit to being quite nervous when the time came for my child. When they laid Rodri on my breast, the first thing I looked at was his ears. Oh, no doubt, Nevin allowed himself a chuckle. Are you ever going to tell Rodri the truth? Never, and not for the sake of my rather besmirched honor. It's simply that every man in Eldon has to believe that Rodri's a true-born male-weed, or he can never rule in Dungorbern. I doubt me if my poor honest son could keep the secret. So do I. The lad's got a fine honor indeed. My thanks for telling me the truth. It clears up a great puzzle. Addern's been rambling about Westfolk blood in the Maleweed clan, and now it skips a generation to come out in someone. But that seemed more than a bit far-fetched to me. And quite unnecessary, Lovian said with a small firm nod, then proceeded to change the subject in a way that made it clear she never wanted it raised again. I wonder when Rice will ride our way. He'll have to give his agreement on the way I settled this rebellion. I suppose he's already polishing a few nasty remarks to spoil his brother's victory. You can't know how hard it is for a woman to have two of her sons wrangling like this. Nevin, do you know why Rice hates Rodri so much? I don't. I wish I did. I'd put a stop to it. This time Nevin wasn't merely putting Lovian off with cryptic remarks. Over the years he'd done many meditations to discover if Rice's hatred was part of the tangled chain of weird that Nevin and Rodri shared. It was no such thing, merely one of those irrational tempers that spring up between blood kin. At some points, Rice and Rodri would have to resolve it, if not in this life, then in the next, but that mercifully would be no concern of his. There were other souls, of course, who were his concern, and that afternoon Nevin went to Colin's chamber. He found Colin dressed and out of bed, sitting on the carved chest by the window with his left arm in a sling. Colin was pale and so gaunt that the dark circles under his eyes looked like pools of shadow, but he was mending nicely. How well will this blasted arm heal, do you think? Colin asked. I truly don't know. We'll have to wait until we get the splints off. It was a clean break, and you were too sick at first to move it much, so there's hope. At least it wasn't my sword arm. Now here, are you still brooding about Rodri? Don't be a dolt, Erbman. Jill's safe, and that's the end to it. Colin looked idly out the window. But I've still got to eat along the long road. So he did, and Nevin felt an odd pang of sympathy for his old enemy, whose very life depended on how well he could use a sword and shield. A broken bone was a hard thing to mend, even for someone with his lore, simply because splints and strips of cloth and rabbit skin glue never really held the break perfectly immobile. Well, Nevin said at last, at least you'll have all the winter to recover. Rodri will certainly give you his shelter till spring. True spoken, our young lord's got more honor than most. Will you be sheltering here too? I will. Nevin felt like adding, cursed right I will. He was going to be needed. Soon they would all be shut up together in a stormy elded winter, and he doubted if Jill and Rodri would be able to hide their love affair. After all, they were remembering a passion they'd shared life after life, the memory close to the surface of their minds, where they merely found it but thought it knew. Even without a shield, Colin would be a very hard man for Rodri to best, especially when Eldred law gave his father every right to kill the man who dishonored his daughter. The army stayed in Dunbrudlin for some days to bury the dead and let the wounded rest before the long journey home. Jill was pleased when, out of respect for the Dwemer, Rodri had his men put Laudelane in a proper grave rather than throwing him in the trench with the other rebels. But then everything that Rodri did pleased her, as if in her eyes he were a god come to walk among mortals. The memory of her night in his arms haunted her. Rather than ending her hunger for him, it had made it worse, like trying to douse a fire with oil. Yet she kept her bargain and did her best to avoid him. Another thought haunted her constantly, too. What if Da ever found out? Finally, the morning came when they would return to Dunguerberin. After she saddled her horse, Jill went to say farewell to Addern and the two elves, who were grinning at the prospect of leaving the lands of men for home. "Here, Jill," Calandrell said, if ever you weary of Eldred, then ride west and find us. The west folk will show you the way. Oh, the wild folks will show you the way." "My thanks. Truly that would gladden my heart to see you all again." "Maybe someday you will," Addern said, "and if not, think of me every now and then, and I'll do the same for you." As they mounted their horses, Jill suddenly felt like weeping. She'd never known men she'd liked so well so fast. Someday I will ride west, she thought, someday. Yet she felt a little coldness around her heart from somehow knowing that someday was a long time away, if it ever came at all. She waited at the edge of the camp until they'd ridden out of sight. Then she went back to her own people and to Rodri, waiting for her at the head of the army. On the day that the victorious army returned to Dunguerberin, Colin sat by the window where he had a good view of the gates and the ward below. The day was wet, with a fine drizzle of rain that turned the cobbles below as clean and slick as metal, and the draught, though the window was cold, but he kept his watch until at last he saw them filing in. The men wrapped in wool cloaks. At the head was Jill, riding a golden western hunter. Grinning in a gape of relief, Colin leaned out the windowsill and watched as she dismounted, threw her reins to a servant, then ran for the broch. Colin closed and barred the wooden shutters without a doubt that she was running to see him. In just a few minutes, Jill flung the door open and stepped in, pausing out of breath in the doorway. "What did you do, run all the way up?" "I did. If you're going to beat me, I want it over with." Colin laughed and held out his good arm to her. "I'm still too weak to beat you, and I don't even want to. I'm so cursed glad to see you alive." When she flung herself down next to him, he hugged her gingerly, aware of the ache down his side from the healing wound, then kissed her on the forehead. She gave him a smile as beautiful as the sun rising. Your old Da's head is swollen these days, my sweet. So my lass gained the honor of the day, did she? I saw that horse you rode in. Was it a gift from the Cadvarok?" "It was," Jill grinned at him, "and after the battle I ate at the head of the honor table." "Listen to you, you little hellcat." Colin gave her an affectionate squeeze. "But I warn you, if I ever hear you talking about riding to another battle, I'll beat you so hard that you won't be able to sit on a horse." "Don't trouble your heart, Da." Her smile was abruptly gone. "Oh, it's splendid to sit here with you and share my glory, but I don't ever want to ride to war again." "Well and good then. I suppose you had to see for yourself and learn the hard way. You're too much like me to learn any other way." When she laughed, he bent his head to kiss her, then realized that Nevin was standing in the doorway watching them with oddly frightened expression, quickly stifled. Colin let go of Jill and moved away. The old man's stare was a mirror, making him see the ugly, twisted thing that he'd hidden from himself until that moment. "How do you fare?" Nevin said. "The Cadvarok wants to see you, but I wanted to make sure you weren't overtired." "I'm fine." "Indeed?" Nevin raised an eyebrow. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Colin snarled. "Jill, leave us alone. Do I want to hear what his lordship says?" "I said go." Like a kicked dog, she got up and slunk out of the room, letting her go, knowing how much he'd hurt her made his heart ache. He was afraid to look at Nevin. You know, the old man said, there's more than one kind of battle that a man has to fight. Colin felt shame flood him like a cold water, but mercifully Nevin left without another word. Colin leaned back against the shutters and felt himself shaking. As soon as he was well, he told himself he was going to ride out and leave Jill behind under Lovian's protection. It was going to hurt like poison, but it was the best way. He knew he could do it when the time came because he'd been doing it for her sake, and if he died in the next battle somewhere far from Eldon, she'd never even have to know he was dead. Cullen, Rodri said. Cullen looked up with a start. He'd never even noticed the Lord come in. How do you fare? I can leave. I'm fine, my lord. Rodri had never looked more like a lord than he did that morning in his soft shirt embroidered with red lions, his plaid thrown back from his shoulders and pinned at one side with a jeweled ring brooch, his head on the hilt of his finely worked sword. But Colin found himself thinking of him as a boy and one he might have loved like a son. It was going to hurt to leave Rodri behind, too. Will you forgive me for taking Jill off to war, Rodri said. It ached my heart to let a lass do my fighting for me. And who were you to argue with Dwemer? You know, my lord, ever since Jill was a little lass, all she ever talked about was getting a chance at battle glory. I'm not surprised she grabbed her chance when it came. She always could lie like a little weasel when she wanted something. Well, maybe so, Rodri looked sharply away, but you truly do forgive me? It's been aching my heart wondering what you thought of me. Here, lad, it doesn't become a noble born to care one way or another what dishonored man thinks of him. Oh, horseshit, you must have been dishonored once or you wouldn't be carrying that dagger. But what do I care what you did all those years ago? I came to offer you a place in my warband, and not just any place. I want you for my captain. It's not just me. Amber and the lads have been dropping hints, like about how honored they'd be to ride behind you. Oh, ye gods, I can't take that. What? Why not? It's just not fitting. Nonsense, Rodri tossed his head. I even asked Sligan what he thought of the idea, and he said it was a cursed good one. You don't need to worry about my vassals looking down their noses at you or such like. Cullen opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could never tell Rodri the real reason he wanted to ride away from the most generous lord he'd ever met. Oh, by the hells, Cullen, are you truly going to say me nay? I am not, my lord. Well and good then. We can leave all the kneeling and fine words for when you're better. Here, your face is white as snow. Let me help you up, Captain. You better lie down. Cullen took the offered aid and made it safely back to his bed. After Rodri left, he lay there staring at the ceiling. Rodri had handed him back the honor and decency he thought he'd lost forever. But he would know that he was unworthy, that everything was poisoned at his heart. Jill, Jill, he thought, how could I, my own daughter? He turned his face to the pillow and wept the first time since he'd laid on Syrian's grave, and this time too he was weeping for her and for their daughter. After Cullen ordered her out of his chamber, Jill went down to the great hall in the sulk, but soon she realized that it was probably best that she was gone when Rodri and Cullen were together. Since the warband were off tending their horses and the noble-born in conference with the Tyrant up in Sligan's sick room, the hall was deserted except for a serving lass dissolutely wiping the tables with a wet rag. Jill dipped herself a tankard of ale, then stood by the warband's hearth where a peat fire smoldered against the chill. In a few minutes, Roderick came down to the staircase and strode over to her. She loved watching the way he moved with the graceful strength of a young panther. He made her a bow, then looked at her with eyes so hungry that she knew he was remembering their night together. I've just spoken with Cullen. I made him captain of my warband. Did you do it for his sake or to keep me here? For his sake. Then I thank you from the bottom of my heart, my lord. It hurts to hear you call me my lord. Rodri looked down and scuffled the floor with the toe of his boot. but I'm mindful of our bargain, one night and no more." "Well and good then." Yet when they looked at each other, all she wanted was to throw her arms around him and kiss him, no matter who might see. "Mother's going to offer you a place in her retinue," Rodri said at last. "Cursed if I'd have you waiting tables or chopping turnips in the kitchen. Would you offer me a place in your war band?" "Do you want one? I will." "I don't. I just wanted to see what you'd say." "I'd give you anything you wanted if only I could. Ah, Jill, I'd marry you if they'd let me. I mean that. It's not just some weaseling words from a dishonorable man." "I know, and I'd marry you if I could." Rodri's eyes filled with tears, like an elf indeed, Jill thought, but she felt like weeping herself. Irritably, he rubbed his eyes on his shirt sleeve and looked away. "Ah, ye gods, I respect your father so much. I think that hurts worst of all." Rodri strode off, slamming out the door of the hall. For a moment, Jill thought of riding off alone as a silver dagger herself, but rationally she knew that she had to take Lovian's offer. The long road had come to an end here in Dun Gorberin, where she would live close to Rodri but far, far away. All at once she wanted to be with her father. She refilled the tankard and took it upstairs. When she came in, he was lying on his bed, and something about his eyes told her he'd been weeping. She'd assumed he was touched by the honor just paid him. "Is that ale for your old father?" Cullen sat up, arranging a smile. "My thanks." "Lord Rodri told me how he honored you." Jill handed him the tankard. "It's so splendid. It's about time someone recognized what kind of man you are." Cullen winced. "Does that wound ache?" "A bit. The ale will help." Jill perched on the end of the bed and watched him drink. She felt that she'd never loved him more, her wonderful father who'd his pride back to match his glory. Later in the afternoon, Lovian summoned Jill to the women's hall, the second floor of one of the secondary blocks. It was more a large suite than a hall, a sign that the tyrants of Dun Gorberin could support their womenfolk in luxury. There were separate bedchambers for Lovian serving women and a large half-round of a room with bardic carpets, little tables, and a carved cushioned chair in profusion. Lovian greeted her warmly and led her to a chair, while Medela offered her a plate of honeyed apricots and Danyan poured her a goblet of pale bardic wine. "I must say I never thought I'd have to thank a lass for saving my son's life," Lovian said, "but I do thank you, and from the bottom of my heart." "Her grace is more than welcome, and truly you've offered me more repayment than I deserve." "Nonsense, you have much to learn about life in court, of course, but I'm sure you'll do splendidly. The first thing we have to do is sew you up some proper dresses." Jill's dismay must have shown on her face because the three of them laughed gently at her. "Oh, come now," Danyan said. "You can't go around dressed like a lad." "Besides," Medela broke in, "you're so pretty, child. Once your hair grows and we've gotten you turned out, why, you'll have lads clustering around you like bees round a rose bush." Jill stared blankly at her. "Child," Lovian said, "is something wrong?" "Well, your grace, I mean no respect, but don't you all remember that I've killed 2 men?" They went as still as if they'd been turned to stone by Dwemer. Only then did Jill realize just how completely her one victory battle had set her apart from other women. Not even the powerful Lovian would ever know what she knew, the bitter tangle of glory of wagering your life against another's and winning. So you have," Lovian said at last. "I was assuming that you'd want to put all that behind you." "I do, your grace, but I can't, not so easily anyway." Jill began to feel like a horse in a bedchamber. "I mean no insult, truly I don't." "Of course not, child, and none's taken," Lovian said, "but true enough, chatter about lads in pretty clothes isn't going to amuse you the way it used to amuse the 3 of us. This is very interesting, Jill. Have you ever thought of marrying, by the way?" "I haven't, your grace. Who would I have married without a dowry? Some tavern man?" True spoken, but all that's changed now. Lovian gave her a good-humored smile. Your beauty and my favor are dowry enough for any lass. There's many a rising young merchant who'd admire a wife with your spirit, and for that matter, many a landless noble lord who needs my goodwill. You wouldn't be the first woman to win a title with her looks. I see. But if you don't want to marry, Danyan broke in, no one will force you into it either. It's just most lasses do. My thanks, but this is all so sudden, I don't know what to think. Of course, Lovian said, there's no hurry. Although all of them smiled at her, Jill realized they were looking on her as a strange kind of invalid, a victim who needed nursing back to health. She began to feel like a falcon indeed, used to soaring at the edge of the wilderness, but now caught and brought back to hunt at the Lord's command. Since Lovian practically ordered her to, Jill agreed to wear women's clothes down to dinner that night, as pleased as if they had a new daughter. Medula and Danyan fussed over Jill. She had a bath with perfumed soap, dried herself off on a thick bardic towel, then submitted to having Medula comb her hair before she dressed. First came the narrow white underdress with tight sleeves and a blue overdress hanging full from gathered shoulders. Around her waist, a kirtle of Lovian's plaid tucked the dress in and made pockets of sorts with its folds, enough to carry a table dagger and a handkerchief. Although Medula offered her a tiny jeweled dagger, Jill insisted on carrying her own. In spite all of the honor of being treated this way, there were limits to what she'd put up with. She took a few steps and nearly tripped. The underdress was far too narrow for her usual stride. Poor Jill, Danyan said with honest sympathy. Well, you'll get used to it in a bit. Alternatingly mincing and stumbling, Jill followed them down to the great hall where Lovian was already seated at the head of the honor table. Since they would have to await Rye's final judgment on the war, all of Rodri's noble-born allies were there, except, of course, for the wounded Sligan. The lords rose and bowed rather absently to her grace's women when Eddar laughed out loud. Jill, I swear I didn't recognize you. I hardly recognize myself, my lord. Jill took a place at the foot of the table between Medlia and Danyan. Although everyone was waiting for Rodri, he never came in, and eventually a somewhat annoyed Lovian had the meal served without him. Jill had to pay strict attention to her manners and constantly reminded herself that she couldn't wipe her hands on her dress. She aped Medelia and Danyan and ate using only her fingertips, which she could dab clean on the handkerchief hanging from her kirtle. Okay, that's it for today. I'll probably read next time here in a couple of days. Thanks for watching. Bye.